So in Alan Dowd's latest article, Trump 2.0 versus Cold War 2.0, what I found very thought-provoking was how the world views Trump after January 6th. And Alan stated January 6th gave America's enemies fresh ammunition for the war being waged between the free world and the growing authoritarian bloc. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit more. So welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I am your host, Joy Votrobek, and back with me is our senior fellow, Alan Dowd. Happy New Year, Alan.
Happy New Year to you. Good to be here as always.
Thank you. And I'm sure it's a little chilly where you are.
Colder in Indiana than it is in Florida, but it's winter, so we're okay with it. We're more used to it than you guys. The blast
yes,
you guys
it actually
got down there.
snowed here in Florida, believe it or not. Not where we are, but it did.
Well,
so
that keeps everybody on their toes.
It does. You are right about that. And it's still chilly here for us. Now, you can find all of Alan's articles on our website at www.ascf.us. Please check out our newsletter for upcoming webinars and events, and please consider a donation. Alan, no matter what our thoughts or anybody's thoughts are about January 6th, or if they were there or not, I think that we can agree that President Trump needs to show this growing authoritarian bloc that America is still the beacon of democracy, as you've stated in your article, or a shining city upon a hill, as Reagan has said.
Right.
So with January 6th in mind, do you believe there are still concerns of rising extremism with Trump 2.0? And how will this affect American global leadership?
Well, you just plugged my article, and I'm pretty sure that the latest one that you mentioned will make pretty much everyone angry. People who are big supporters of President Trump or people who are critics of him. But basically what I tried to do is make the point that especially Trump's critics in Europe, they seem to be the most vocal. Whether they like it or not, he's president for the next 4 years. And then I go to making points about some of the effective things he did during that first term, what I call Trump 1.0, and then some of the headaches. One of the headaches was at the end of his first term, and that was the January 6th. We could call it a number of things: protests that got out of hand, demonstrations that got out of hand, riot, mob, or some people would go to the point of insurrection. But the point I was making there is there was, and I think there remains, a hangover effect from that overseas. Whereas the American people may have come to grips with it and settled, made peace with it. People have gone to jail over it. People have served long jail terms in some cases. Some were commuted, I know, this week, right?
Yes.
But there are other aspects, including at home, the law and order issue and the constitutional order issue. But overseas, we had a number of countries that are either look to us as a model or look to us as a hostile force that pointed to January 6th and said this was a real issue. The Chinese government and Chinese state media made points about it, saying things like the beacon has fallen, reference to the shining city on the hill or a beacon of democracy. Several Russian officials jabbed at the United States. In Latin America, where they have had real problems with peaceful transfers of power, there were concerns raised. And then Ukraine, which is trying to build a democracy, which is clearly a democracy now, but trying to sustain one. Their leader said he wondered if America will be able to recapture the place it held. Now, the good news, just to use Zelensky as an example, Joy, is he, it seems, has gotten past what he was thinking in January of 2021. Here we are 4 years later. He's met with Trump and Trump officials. He looked to the United States throughout the Biden administration and now into the Trump 2.0 administration for leadership and for help. So maybe there's some good signs there that the hangover effects of January 6th are overseas starting to ebb. That'd be good.
Yes, I agree. And I was going to get to Zelensky as well. And I think we were talking last time, he was calling on Trump to honor the peace through strength
yes.
strategies. So we'll see how that plays out. But I did want to talk about, in your paper, there was his successes, like the Abraham Accords you brought up.
Sure.
So do you believe Trump will try to facilitate peace agreements again in the Middle East?
I do, and I think that the very strong foundation, the Abraham Accords, they can build on that. They already, as you referenced, and as that article from the, I guess that'd be the January issue,
yes.
Points out, Israel made peace deals with UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, and that Trump administration deserves credit for it, as I make that point. And I think the Trump administration will be working hard to bring Saudi Arabia especially into that community. Already, as you know, Egypt and Jordan long before had made peace with Israel, but Saudi Arabia would be a big linchpin. And I think Saudi Arabia during the Biden administration was looking at whether it was going to be able to make a peace with Israel.
That's a good point too. And
from what I understand, it was fairly close. And then October 7 happened, and that kind of literally derailed or blew things up. So I do think, to answer your question, the Trump administration will push forward on that. And I suspect in less than, early in this term, I think that they'll be able to add Saudi Arabia to that Abraham community.
That's a good point with Saudi Arabia. And yes, they definitely were coming close to something with Israel before October 7th. Right. And now with the new leadership in Syria, I'm guessing that Saudi is definitely going to be interested in working the Middle East.
That the new leadership in Syria has so far has shown great moderation and has been very reasonable. The old saying, "The enemy of my enemy," applies here. They've kicked Russia out of Syria, yes, which is a very, very good thing. From what I understand, the things I've read this week, they don't want Russia coming back. They've literally, the Russian naval force is out, and it's been dispersed. That's a big deal, as you know, Joy.
It is.
Through much of the Cold War, the Russians had a couple toeholds in the Mediterranean. Then when the Cold War ended, they didn't. And it wasn't until about 2014, 2015, where Putin got involved in the Syrian civil war to back Assad. And then as a payoff, he got another toehold there in Syria with an air base and a naval base. And that's gone, as you say, with this new Syrian leadership. We'll see what can happen with that leadership vis-a-vis Israel. That may be a big stretch.
It's interesting how it's unfolding here.
Yeah, it is. But already they certainly are better than Assad. No one should cry tears for,
yes, I would agree
him
with
being
that
gone.
Too.
So, right.
I got a little off subject with Syria, but that was a very good point, and I think that we'll see something happening there, definitely with Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And then on to Ukraine, as we're discussing with Zelensky. We'll see how Trump and Putin work things out, as he mentioned in his inauguration address that he thinks this will end quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he's hedged a bit from we'll be able to solve it in 48 hours to his main Ukraine, emissary, General Kellogg, has said, I think we can get it done in 100 days. So 3 months, that would be great. I think everyone wants the fighting to end. Zelensky has made that clear. He just wants it to end in a way that secures Ukraine's interests, legitimate interests, and I would say we should want it to end in a way that solidifies Ukraine as a clear, independent, democratic European state, not as a Russian vassal, not as a Belarus type country, which is, basically independent in name only. So there's a way to get there, and I think Kellogg is working hard at that. He actually wrote a long paper long before he was appointed to play this role about what he sees a peace deal could be. But America has to be involved in helping secure Ukraine, whether that's part of NATO. Maybe I don't know if that's going to be possible, but that's certainly what Ukraine wants. It's certainly what Russia doesn't want, as we know. So, but I do think that with Russia losing, they say it's now 1,000 casualties a day, which is just ghastly, and up to 700,000 casualties. That's dead and wounded people who are taken off the battlefield in less than three years. The war will be 3 years next month, February 22. So So it's
there's
just,
a lot of losses on both sides.
yes, and the Ukrainian numbers they try to keep closer to the vest, and our intelligence agencies don't share them as much, but they have to be in the tens of thousands. And in Ukraine's case, a lot of civilians, unlike in the Russian case, which is one of the real tragedies of this war of aggression.
And then moving on to the other hot spot that you discussed in your article, the South China Sea.
Right. Well, in the South China Sea, I say in that essay, the president deserves credit for, I think, being firm with China. President Trump secretly, quietly deployed troops into Taiwan to help train up the Taiwanese military. Interestingly, as you and I have talked, I think, in past podcasts, the Biden administration let it be known that there were U.S. troops in Taiwan, and that was a signal to China. And the Biden administration increased the numbers of those trainers, from what I understand, in open source materials. I think,
as we discussed before, Biden towed the line with
that's
China,
right.
certainly.
I think there's a clear bipartisan policy on China.
Yes.
I think it's Senator Cornyn who said, we don't agree on much on Capitol Hill, but one thing we agree on is that China is a threat. And if you look at the way the votes go, if you look at things like the China, this new China Security Committee of the House,
yes,
which had huge bipartisan support to have it stood up, and you look at some things like kind of Pacific deterrence monies that are being spent and allocated by Congress. It shows that there's bipartisan support. Biden built on some things Trump began. Trump sent high-level cabinet official to Taiwan. Trump, I think, both in Europe but also with Japan and Australia and South Korea, by saying things like you need to do more on defense, he forced them to do more on defense, which is a good thing. And the Japanese are pouring money into their deterrent capabilities. They're going to be the third largest defense budget on Earth in 2 years. They're doubling their defense budget over a 4-year period of time, and working very closely with us, hand in glove. The Aussies' biggest defense budget they've ever had, I think, was 2024. And then we just saw, I think yesterday, the Quad, which I know your listeners know about, but I'll just mention, is U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, a security dialogue. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, met with his counterparts from the Quad in Washington, I think yesterday or Tuesday, and they put out a very firm statement that they're going to deepen security cooperation. And what they didn't talk about is the things they're doing. The actions speak louder than the words. The four of them are doing a lot of things together in joint naval maneuvers, and that's very important, working together on some cyber things. But that's all aimed at China and the South China Sea. And finally, I've harangued and dominated the mic here, but finally we have to mention the Philippines. Truly a dramatic change. We've seen them in the last 4 years. Reopening, as you know, their territory to U.S. forces. 9 bases the U.S. has access to. Just this week and last week, Philippine and U.S. naval assets were sailing together. The Philippines and Japan very much working together. Japan building up and training up the Philippine military. And so that's an important one that I think is overlooked sometimes, and it shouldn't be. As you know, Joy, Philippines is a treaty ally, so that's
and we were just
important.
discussing this yesterday. Our senior analyst, Larry, you've met him before.
Yes,
But we were talking about that and how China really has hammered the Philippines this last 4 years.
That's right, and that could be as big a flashpoint as Taiwan. And unlike Taiwan, we do not have a defense alliance with Taiwan anymore, an automatic mutual
No, there's an
defense
old
treaty.
Treaty.
That's right.
70s,
One died,
79.
and then the Taiwan Relations Act is very vague.
Yes,
but
it is.
Philippines is very clear. It's a mutual defense, just like we have with Japan, South Korea, and much of Europe and Australia. So that's when they really are bullying the Philippines, and Philippines are standing up to them to their credit.
And the alliances, like you mentioned. In fact,
Right.
that leads me into, and I didn't even get that far yet, but I was going to talk about the comment in your article, which I thought was really good, because we all know Trump makes a lot of comments and statements. And you say, in relation to Europe, and this is with NATO in mind, although Trump's comments about NATO were often critical and sometimes counterproductive, former NATO Secretary General Jens if I'm saying this correctly, Stoltenberg, argued that Trump's actions speak louder than words. And as you were saying, he has actually helped increase the defense spending in NATO nations, along with Japan and Australia.
That's right. The NATO nations, I would submit that it's a little bit of Russia and a little bit of Trump, the fear of Russia and then responding to Trump's call to do more. The difference between Trump and a lot of former other U.S. presidents and U.S. secretaries of defense and secretaries of state in dealing with NATO in the post-Cold War era is he said aloud a lot of what was said quietly. He didn't say it maybe diplomatically, but this has been a common theme from Washington. NATO, you have to do more since the end of the Cold War, when a lot of European countries just kind of took a holiday from defense spending. Well, what Russia has done, both in Ukraine and other places in Europe, has awoken them. And Trump has said you have to do more or else. And his or else is a worrisome thing to NATO's membership. So 19% increase in defense spending among European NATO just last year. NATO asks all the members, it's not binding, they ask all members to spend at least 2%. And it's gone from 5 members of the 32-member alliance to, I think it's now 24 over the last 3 years. And that's I think Trump deserves credit for that. And I think that Vladimir Putin's aggression deserves some blame for it. But in Europe, I as you know, I try to call balls and strikes with presidents, whether it's President Trump, President Biden, President Obama, President Bush. He I think rhetorically was out of line a lot of times with our allies. But as Stoltenberg said, just look at the actions. It's hard to see much there in the actions that were harmful to NATO during Trump 1.0. And I'll just tick through some of them if you want me to, Joy.
Yeah, I was going to say he pretty much just says what's on his mind. So
I mean, he says but the things that he did or allowed to happen were pretty impressive. He proved a permanent base in Poland. That was a big deal, and that base was stood up during the Biden administration. Another example of bipartisan agreement, even though neither of those men ever really talked about that. Biden and Trump. He authorized the chain of command to eviscerate Russian forces in Syria who were approaching U.S. stabilization forces. There was clear lines of demarcation. The Russian and Syrian forces crossed that and started to attack. That went all the way up the chain of command. And, we found out about a month later in testimony from General Mattis, who was Secretary of Defense, that hundreds of Russians were killed in that. A person who's soft on Russia doesn't do that, I don't think.
Right.
He allowed or reinstated some key naval and army assets that had been shut down during the Obama administration. He tripled funding levels for the European Deterrence Initiative, which is a fund we have to kind of strengthen the eastern flank of NATO. And then, interestingly, two countries joined NATO during Trump 1.0, Montenegro and North Macedonia. That's not a small matter either. 2 more joined during Biden, by the way. That was Sweden and Finland. Right. So NATO went from 28 to 32 in the last 5 years. So 5-6 years. So that's not an anti-NATO set of actions. His words and his comments, I think, are not always constructive. I like the old saying, it's better to praise in public and criticize in private. I think that applies with good coaches and probably with good presidents, but he takes a different tack rhetorically. My hope is he can build on this and build on what Biden did, especially in Poland, and that NATO can be stronger and more muscular and more capable over the next 2 or 3 years.
And you bring up his rhetoric, and I think we're always going to talk to this, but so he's already pulled out of Paris Accords and the WHO.
Right.
And they are actions, not rhetoric, I'm saying, but
True, that's right.
His renaming of
And
the Gulf
those
of America
those
is interesting.
actions, yeah, those actions have effect. There's certain foreign. There are certainly actions that are connected to foreign relations. The WHO terribly lost quite a bit of its standing in the eyes of American policymakers and American people during the pandemic.
Yes, and I'm glad you
And
brought that up because that's what I wanted to say is I thought that actually wasn't a bad move considering how things were handled during the pandemic.
right,
So he's
and
sending
it
a
may
clear
be
message there.
right. He's sending a message, and it may be that the WHO will make some reforms, and the United States will return. That those kinds of things happen all the time. The Paris Climate Accords. This is something that this kind of thing has happened basically going back to the Clinton Bush handoff, and then the Bush Obama handoff, and then the Obama Trump handoff, and now again with the Biden Trump. The American policymakers have, as the White House changes power, have taken different positions on what America's role will be in dealing with climate-related issues. And a lot of Americans, American policymakers say, let's work together on climate issues, but it makes zero sense for the United States to be expected to do X, Y, and Z when it's not polluting anywhere near as much as China. And
Yes.
China doesn't have to do X, Y, and Z or any of the above, you know,
Thank you
and that's
for-
really.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
go
bringing
ahead.
that point up because I wanted to make that as well and state that America really has pulled back on our coal production. And I know he was
Right.
talking about this during his address,
Campaign,
but
right.
yes, we're going to drill. He wants to drill, and that's fine.
Right.
Economically, that's good for us. But as you said, China is the biggest polluter, and they're actually increasing their coal production, not decreasing.
That's right. And coal is, you know, I'm no expert in ecology or energy issues, but I know coal is dirtier than other things like
Right.
natural gas and other kinds of energy options or alternatives. And China is pumping a lot of that into the air, those kinds of chlorofluorocarbons and all that stuff that's bad for the air. And I think that is at the crux of what has bothered some American policymakers with some of these international accords that are expecting not only the United States and Europe to make adjustments that they're already way ahead of in making, but also to pay for a lot of these reforms, and China basically not doing its share, especially relative to how much pollution it's generating. So I think that's probably I would submit, Joy, that probably both those actions with the WHO and the Paris Climate Accords probably fairly popular if you would ask the average voter.
Yes, I was going to bring that up because I thought, do you believe these moves are to appease the mega platform, which it
I don't know if
obviously
it's I don't know if it's to appease the MAGA group as much as it's I think that may be a lot of Americans, from what I understand, this is a topic for one of your other experts. The true MAGA core might be 30% of the country. People believe, in the Make America Great Again platform, if you will. But many other Americans voted for him both in 2016 and 2024 to get him to win the White House. So beyond that, I do think these are probably fairly popular policies. These two. Now, I don't think one thing I will say, and we don't need to go backwards, but if you look at and I'll talk about this in the next essay, that'll be the February essay, Joy. Support for NATO, support for sending defensive aid to Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel, very popular with the American people. And Trump supports some of those things, but he's been very critical of NATO, as we talked about. He's been very critical or dubious of how Biden managed getting aid and the amount of aid. It seems like he was critical of getting to Ukraine, but that's something where Trump's, if he tacks to what he said during the campaign, he's going to find himself on the wrong side of the American voter, because those are high number. I'm talking like, you and I know this. It's very hard to get 77% of the country to agree on anything, but 77% of Americans support these aid programs, defensive aid to countries willing to fight for themselves, and
Yes,
I'll
we've
have
discussed that
I'll have all the
before, yep.
specific numbers in the next essay.
Yeah, and we have discussed that before. You're right. I agree with that. And it's a good point you made up about just maybe 30% of his platform being on the mega
Right.
side. But mega does kind of give an idea of more of an isolationist pull.
Sure.
However, I think that from what we're seeing so far, he's continuing to engage constructively with our allies in NATO.
That's right. And as I mentioned in that January column, the two key picks on foreign and defense policy are very much in, I think, the tradition of American engagement. They are not isolations. That's Secretary of State Rubio
Yes.
and National Security Advisor Waltz. Both of them are committed to America being a leader and engaged in the world. And I think that those were two very good picks, and they already are showing their commitment to what you and I would call, I think, pretty much kind of a Reagan view of the world and America's role in the world. And if that is what kind of Trump is reflected in Trump 2.0, I think that would be a good thing.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate your thoughts on my questions and loved your article. So can't wait to hear February's continuation.
We'll get that too. Always enjoy chatting with you, and Happy New Year again. And we'll hopefully you guys won't have any more snow in February.
I know, right? Happy New Year to you, and stay warm up there.
We'll do it.
And to our listeners, please send your thoughts on America's global leadership under Trump 2.0. You can comment, subscribe, and share on our YouTube and Rumble channels. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Substack. So join us again next time for the Peace Through Strength podcast.